A prominent Florida Democrat challenges the Biden administration on gun rights. Plus, Cam Edwards of Bearing Arms talks about Biden's decision to demote the acting ATF director. That and more on this episode of the Weekly Reload podcast.
I made the devil run. I gave him poison just for fun. I had one friend.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Weekly Reload podcast. I'm your host, Steve Dettelbach. I'm also the founder of thereload.com, where you can pick up a membership today if you want exclusive access to dozens, now probably in the hundreds. It's been a year. It's a 1 year anniversary of the Reload, and we have hundreds of exclusive pieces for our members, pieces mostly analysis stuff. We also have some exclusive reporting that we've done in the past that's available only to members, and you'll get this podcast a day early, as well as the opportunity to appear on the show in a members segment, which is one of my favorite segments to do. But you get a lot for the membership, and it's how we keep going. We're 100% reader funded. I own the whole company, so there's no secret benefactor or investor out there anywhere, and I'm not rich, so the funding is up to you guys. But this week we've got a great guest, Cam Edwards, one of the smartest people in gun media, in my opinion, and we're going to talk about the ATF situation. But actually, before we do that, Cam recently lost his son, and so I was just hoping people might be able to, take some time to say a prayer for him and his family, if they can. But Cam, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you very much for that. I will take any and all of the thoughts and prayers. I know that that's a phrase that has become, something that some of the gun control crowd likes to mock. But I can tell you that the support that I've received, I haven't really been on social media much since I first got on to talk about what had happened. But I can tell you the outreach from people, including yourself, it's really been amazing, and it has been a source of strength through some really crummy times. I'm not sure what kind of language I can use on this podcast, so I'll leave it there. But thank you.
Yeah, I mean, anything you feel like expressing, you feel free. But yeah, I'm here to support you any way I can, and I'm sure that a lot of our audience who know and appreciate what you do want to support you as well. So I know, thoughts and prayers. Yeah, it's something that I think can be genuinely uplifting for people who are going through difficult times.
I will tell you, when I first tweeted out that my son Harrison had passed away unexpectedly a week before his 31st birthday, one of the folks, I won't name the individual, but somebody reached out to me privately who is very much on the other side, and said, "Hey, I want you to know I'm, your family's in my prayers," and then sent me another message saying, "Oh God, I just realized that you might take that as like me mocking you because of the whole thoughts and prayers thing." So I thought I didn't realize I could laugh at that moment, but I actually did have to laugh because it just struck me as so funny that, okay, even they know that there's something weird about it. And I wrote back and said, I thought hadn't even crossed my mind. Thanks for, reaching out. But yeah, it has been, it's just been really hard, and it's going to be really hard for quite a while. But the fact that, again, there are just so many folks who I know are thinking about us and are praying for us. It does matter. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know a lot of people genuinely have a deep care for you and your wife and your entire family. So I just wanted to make that clear and give people who are listening an opportunity to put you in their prayers as well. But hopefully we can maybe distract you a little bit from that situation and just talk about guns, right? I mean, that's it's something that you've dedicated a large part of your life to, and you're still going strong with it over there at Bearing Arms, writing about the latest news out of the ATF, which is, of course, that they have demoted Marvin Richardson, who's the acting director, in favor of a U.S. attorney from Arizona, who I believe his name is Gary
Restano, yeah.
Restano.
Tomato.
Apologize.
Let's call the whole thing off and just keep Marvin Richardson over there. I don't think that's an option for Biden.
Yeah, right. And it's a fascinating move. This comes 1 week after the president announced his nominee to be permanent director, Steve Dettelbach, another who's a former U.S. attorney and Democratic candidate for AG. But I don't know, what's your first reaction to all this? What do you think about it?
My first reaction is this may be like the first moment of genuine surprise that I've had with the Biden administration. Like, I wasn't surprised to see them nominate David Chipman as ATF director. I was pleasantly surprised to see Chipman's nomination fail, but that wasn't because of that wasn't a move by the Biden administration. This really was surprising to me because, Marvin Richardson, as you know, was planning on retiring, I believe, at the end of the year, if not beforehand. So, here's a guy who was already on his way out the door. The earliest they're talking about confirming Steve Bettelman, is it Dettelbach? Dettelbach, yeah. The earliest that they're talking about confirming him I've seen from the White House is like the fall. So
yeah, I thought that was weird too,
right?
Honestly.
And if you think about it, so now you get rid of Marvin Richardson, and as you reported, and I think this is also really important, a couple of top deputies are leaving too. So Richardson gets demoted down to deputy director. So he's going to, supposedly stick around as, part of the institutional knowledge. And then you get Restano in there as the interim director. There's going to be this huge leadership vacuum. I mean, the idea that some interim director is going to be able to turn around this troubled agency in 6 months or 4 months, and then you're going to have somebody permanent come in. It's just absurd. I mean, this is going to throw the ATF into even more chaos in the short term, I would think. So the idea that, this is going to, light a fire under the ATF, show the renewed focus for the agency, I think it actually is probably going to do the exact opposite. To me, what this is pure pandering to the gun control lobby on the part of the Biden administration. This came a few days after, I think it was the AP ran a big story about, disgruntled anti-gun activists like David Hogg who, don't feel like Biden has done enough. I think this is throwing the gun control groups a bone named Marvin Richardson. And it looks like the gun control lobby is happy to, gnaw on that bone for a while.
It's weird, though, to me. I think you're right as far as the motivation for it. Richardson was effectively, personally, his leadership was attacked in the New York Times back in March and really the complaints about it. I mean, I don't, maybe that's just from where we're coming from, but to me, they seem pretty superfluous. I mean, they complain that he went to SHOT Show, which is something the ATF always does. Right. It wasn't some new policy from Marvin Richardson. And they complained that the ghost gun rule wasn't getting implemented fast enough because it was initially it was going to be published in June instead of March, instead of April. So that's like,
which, by the way,
months.
It still has not been published. It still has not been published in the Federal Register. Try to find it in the Federal Register. It's not there. They held a press conference. They had the dog and pony show, but it has still not been published. The 120-day clock, or 90 days, again, we don't know because it hasn't been published, but the clock has not started ticking yet. So, which to me is another very interesting fact.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Now, I'm going to look it up. That was accurate as of Wednesday afternoon, but I'm going to look it up as we're talking here.
That is important, too, because it only becomes, relevant once it's actually published in the Register, not when they make a press announcement.
Right.
Of course. So that is fascinating. And the thing about the complaint over that, too, was like, the June timeline was not out of the ordinary for a federal rule. Federal rules take a year and a half to actually get done and finalized, especially when there's hundreds of thousands of comments that the ATF has to respond to, like they did in this case.
Yeah. And I'm looking here, and no, the last thing that was published in the Federal Register dealing with the ATF was a proposed e-collection of e-comments requested for the ATF Citizens Academy on April 18th. That's it. So yeah, it is
slightly less controversial one.
Right. Exactly. So yeah. I mean, again, this is all been, I think, a dog and pony show designed to mollify gun control activists, and by design, I think tried at this point not even energize the Democratic base, but just to give them some reason to go out and vote in November, because I think Biden Democrats are just terrified about what's going to happen in the midterms, and They know they're not going to get the vote of gun owners. I mean, they know that vote's lost. All you got to do is look at the election results in Virginia and see how Terry McAuliffe fared in rural counties. So I think this is a pure political pander at the expense of our Second Amendment rights, by the way, and at the expense of Marvin Richardson's career.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. I did think the twist, the thing that's particularly odd to me is like, so at first the president came out and, he had a whole Rose Garden speech where he announced the ghost gun rule, and then he announced Dettelbach as the permanent nominee, a second nominee. And that certainly seemed to be in response to the public criticism, really, frankly, pretty harsh public criticism he was getting from the gun control groups. It was sort of surprising me. I didn't really, I don't really understand the political calculation. I mean, you're right in terms of like trying to motivate them to get out to vote, or at least to keep them engaged.
If not to get out the vote, to keep the campaign cash flowing. I mean, you got to think too about how much money was spent electing Biden in 2020.
Sure.
So Bloomberg's
but then after that,
and Michael Bloomberg and every time, and they've been a big player in state legislative races, not just congressional races, but I mean, they have been spending a lot of money trying to get anti-gun candidates elected. So if they feel like, well, this is going to be a bad year, we're going to try to, allocate our resources to shore up safe seats instead of, trying to spend to, keep more Democrats in office, that might be a factor as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's all absolutely true. I mean, there's obviously good reasons why the president and his administration would want to make sure that the gun control advocates are happy for all those reasons that you laid out. I just always thought it was kind of an odd way for the gun control groups to go about trying to influence the president. But to be fair to them, it worked, right? I mean, it was the exact opposite approach, basically, of the NRA and the gun rights groups with Trump, where they didn't commonly go out and attack him in public. They tried to work behind the scenes. But I'm sure the gun control groups do that too,
right?
Yeah, right. So I mean, maybe this is just the better approach. I don't know. Clearly, it worked on Biden at least. But the weird thing to me is that he'd already done that stuff, and then he's taking this extra step of, in particular, kind of kicking Marvin Richardson on the way out, on his way out the door. And it's like, because again, like you said earlier, he was going to be gone anyway. It wasn't like he was going to stay in there if, Dettelbach's confirmation failed. He's an acting director. He can't stay that long. And they could have just waited until either Dettelbach got through or his nomination failed and then put somebody else in. But for some reason, they felt the need to go the extra mile here to really kind of crap on Marvin Richardson.
Well, yeah, and to that point, you're also right that this is also kind of inside baseball stuff. Like, this isn't the stuff that's going to get, some random suburban mom in a red shirt to go out and pull the lever for a Democrat in November, if they're even aware of this, right? So you're right. This is getting rid of Marvin Richardson. I say getting rid of, demoting him months before his retirement.
It's kind of worse than just getting rid of him.
Yeah, it kind of is.
Almost.
You're right. That doesn't serve the purpose of motivating the Democratic base. That really does sound like, okay, we're going to do this for you because you asked. So then I think the question becomes, why do the gun control activists want Marvin Richardson out of the ATF? 8 months before he was going to retire anyway? Like, what do they get out of it? And that is, I don't have a ready answer for that.
I only have one speculate. This is pure speculation.
Okay. I like pure speculation.
We try to avoid it as much as possible on the show.
Well,
but
at least you're clearly identifying it.
Yeah, pure speculation. But that New York Times piece I mentioned earlier that went after Richardson for those sort of frivolous points about how he was putting the brakes on Biden's gun violence prevention efforts. It's fairly obvious who was the driving force, the main source for that piece, which was David Chipman, who was still very unhappy about how his own nomination went, and apparently it has a real bone to pick with Marvin Richardson in particular. And so it almost feels as though David Chipman is doing a lot of has a lot of influence over how the administration is handling things with the ATF, which is again odd because he went out and was publicly trashing them continually since his nomination failed.
Yeah, but you're right. I mean, this again, pure speculation, but you could easily see Chipman's fingerprints over this. He has been very critical, but I also wonder if, despite the criticism, if not Biden, then one of the higher ups in the administration, maybe even Merrick Garland, wants to do David Chipman a good turn, feels bad about how it all went down. Heck, maybe Merrick Garland and some, or DOJ staffers or even White House officials felt like the White House should have done more. Maybe to try
Susan
to defend
Rice
Chipman.
is one of the key players here too.
Cedric Richmond, I think, is another. Yeah. And so, I that's a possibility that it's not directly coming from Biden, but there are sympathizers, Chipman sympathizers within the White House or DOJ who want to do him a solid and convince Biden that this was the right move to make, I guess. I mean, I don't know, because I suspect that ultimately what's really driving this, as you say, or as you allude to, is personality and not policy. Or at least there's a lot of personality involved, because from a policy perspective, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So it's got to be personal on some level. And yeah, David Chipman would be, a pretty good suspect for someone who would want to get Marvin Richardson out of that job in an embarrassing and public fashion.
Yeah, and it was abrupt. My ATF sources who gave me this story. I'll give you just a little bit of insight. Obviously, I can't say who they are because their jobs are at stake. But it was somebody who came to me. I didn't know this person beforehand. I verified who they were.
Yeah.
But that gives you some indication of how this went over inside the ATF. And then obviously I talked to other sources as well after I got the initial tip. But people didn't like this. Marvin Richardson is very well liked at the ATF and in the industry. The other thing too is, clearly there's a philosophical issue in that. Just the fact that he has relationships with the industry and is well liked by the industry it seems to be one of the driving points as to why the gun control groups don't like him. It's because, if you look at the policy of the ATF during Marvin Richardson's reign, it's not as though the ATF has gotten softer on the industry in any way whatsoever. It's been quite the opposite. Really. Yeah. In a number of policies, stuff that, most people haven't ever heard of, like changes to Form 1, submissions for silencers, just going after inspection, the stuff that Biden wants to do in terms of the zero tolerance policy for any infractions. They're implementing a lot of that stuff. It's not as though Mitch Richardson is, was it Gandalf who stands up and says, "You shall not pass"? Yeah. I think so.
Not really a huge Lord of the Rings guy, but yeah.
You look like, you could play him if you dyed that beard but yeah, it's not as though Marvin Richardson is holding back what the administration wants to do on guns, at least not from the outside. It doesn't appear to be the case. So, it's just such an odd thing to do, but you said earlier, right? This is sort of inside baseball stuff. So why do you think it's going to matter, to the general public or to the larger political narrative that they're doing this to Marvin Richardson?
It could, because even though this is an inside baseball move, look, as you say, Marvin Richardson was not some, secret Second Amendment stalwart, heading up the ATF, trying to undermine the agency's mission at every turn. That's not who we're talking about here. But he is a somewhat sympathetic figure, I think, even to Second Amendment supporters, because the guy got shafted. Honestly, on his way out the door, he got knifed in the back by the president, no less, right? And then he's expected to just stick around and be a good soldier for a few months to train the new guy so that the other new guy can take over. So that, I think, has the possibility, there's a possibility there that this becomes a human interest story, not necessarily even a political story, but a human interest story of a guy who got screwed by the president for political purposes. You add in the fact that Marvin Richardson is black, Steve Dettelbach is white, Gary Restaino is white, David Chipman is white. David Chipman also has a history of allegedly making some racist comments about black ATF agents. And I think when you add that element in, then it becomes even more of a hard news story and not just a human interest story. So there is an element of human interest, but I think there's also genuine, political news being made here that is worthy of attention.
That's where I would agree. The impact could really come is the twofold, right? Is first the racial issues involved, because Marvin Richardson he's a career ATF agent. He had 30 years at the agency. He worked from being a special agent all the way up to director. So he's gone through the entire career path, and then he's getting passed over. He's been passed over twice now to be the permanent nominee. I believe he was also suggested as permanent nominee by Angus King, the senator from Maine, who was one of the key figures to hold up Chipman's nomination. And, the racial aspect of it, him being an African-American director who's passed over for white nominees when the president has specifically maintained that diversity was going to be a key goal of his administration and putting people into positions of power, I think is going to be a big sticking point, especially when it appears that the reason he's being passed over is because he's a career guy who doesn't have political aspirations in terms of using the ATF to enforce stricter gun measures, right? And so, and now this story hasn't broken yet. Haven't published this yet as of our recording of this show, but it will be up by the time the podcast goes live. And the National African American Gun Association is making these points as well. It's not just me or you who believe this is an issue, right? This is coming from a Black gun owners group that says, and I'll give you the quote directly here. This is Philip Smith, the president of the National African American Gun Association, which is now the largest Black gun owner group in the country. He said, while we cannot say with certainty why Mr. Richardson has been passed over twice for the directorship and has been currently demoted, the pattern and speed of these actions has the appearance of being racially motivated and or politically expedient. So clearly, I think that's going to be a major issue when you get to Steve Dettelbach's confirmation hearing. And it didn't have to be, right? They didn't have to do this to Richardson. This could have been an issue anyway, but now it's elevated even more.
It is. And, again, if any fingerprints of this actually ultimately are traced to David Chipman, it becomes a much bigger issue. So I'm sure that you will be continuing to investigate how this went down. Because as you say, this was fairly sudden. There didn't appear to be any whispers of this, within the agency that this was coming. So I'm looking forward to seeing if any information actually comes out about, what led to this. Because as you say, the innocuous reasons, Marvin Richardson wasn't demoted from acting ATF director because the ATF went to SHOT Show. As you say, the ATF goes to SHOT Shows. If you go, I'm sure that the DEA goes to, pharmaceutical conventions. And I'm sure
the
that the
FBI
DEA
also
has,
goes to
good relationships
SHOT Show
with drug companies, even though, you don't want to have, and this I think ultimately is the issue. I don't know if it was the issue with Marvin Richardson, but it's certainly the issue with the gun control movement right now in the Biden administration. They don't want the ATF to have a working relationship with the firearms industry. Yeah. They wanted to have an adversarial relationship. You talked about how, they really want the ATF to be a gun control group with law enforcement powers. And while that sounds hyperbolic, I think it's true. I think it actually is what they want. And it seems to me like, the Biden administration is willing to do whatever it can to make that happen. knowing that they don't have the votes in Congress to do this. So they'll try to make these personnel moves. They'll try to enact these executive actions that go, I believe, beyond the ATF's purview and strays over into Congress's job. Yeah. Sorry about that. My rooster decided to hang out right outside my office. Yes, Mr. Crow is here. I warned Steven when he was on Cam and Company that my rooster likes to hang out. Apparently, he just likes to listen to the conversation too. So hopefully,
he wants to join in. Man.
He does. I don't think he's a big fan of David Chipman. But so since Mr. Crow rudely interrupted my train of thought, I'll just end it there, and I'll let you pick up the next question.
Yeah, I mean, look, plus also, members of the Reload know that I go and watch my mom's farm occasionally, so I've experienced dealing with annoying chickens and roosters, and I don't get the appeal. The eggs are great, but the rest of the process of having chickens is less than ideal in my opinion. I would much rather have a horse. Well, he doesn't like that. You see,
right? Exactly.
He can tell what we're talking about.
He wants to throw down.
Doesn't like my slander. but yeah. So the other aspect, I think all that what you said there is accurate in terms of this philosophical divide, like I mentioned earlier. There really does seem to be that the main criticism of Richardson was just that he had relationships with the industry his agency regulates. And they just, I feel it does seem to be an actual philosophical viewpoint difference that they just don't want the ATF to have those sorts of relationships. Even when you get ATF agents, including the ones who talked to me for this latest story, who say, look, we need those relationships because that's how we get a lot of our tips for suspicious gun transactions. They come from the dealers. There's a certain picture painted by a lot of the gun control organizations about how gun dealers work, that they're, that a lot of them are criminals basically and doing illegal things all the time. And so that they want the ATF to basically treat all gun dealers as though they might be criminals. And whereas a lot of ATF agents in the field will tell you they're more like they're partners. They regulate the industry, but the industry is the one who tells them if there's suspicious patterns of buying that are going on, because how is the ATF even going to know that otherwise? In most cases, they're not. So anyway, that seems to be the pull here. But I wanted to ask you real quick about the other aspect of this. Obviously, we're coming at it from a gun aspect, but I think the White House looks at all this from a crime response aspect, right? They think, we're trying to show that we're being tough on crime. There's this murder surge going on in a lot of cities throughout the country, and we got to show that we're responding to that in a strong way. So we're going to push for a new permanent director of the ATF and go after ghost guns, which they claim are showing up in crimes more frequently. Do you think that is going to be a successful selling point? Do you think gun rights activists are overlooking this point of view at all?
Oh, I think it's going to be completely unproductive if the Biden administration is hoping that this is going to show that they're tough on crime, because this isn't going to do anything to stop crime. First of all, the earliest this rule would take effect would be August. So, and by the way, if any, criminally minded individual hadn't heard about, build, buy, shoot kits before now, I imagine, Biden's Rose Garden infomercial probably alerted them to this fact. So, between now and August, any criminal individual who wants to purchase these things to build their own guns is going to be able to do so. But even after this, let's say the rule takes effect, it's not challenged in court, it's not put on hold. If you want to buy an 80% lower, as I understand it, you still can, right? You can't buy the kit, but you can buy the 80% lower, right?
You can't buy it alongside a jig and and tools to finish it. But they haven't really changed anything about the 80% lower, especially in the AR-15.
And again, 3D printing has advanced to the point, I know you talked to Cody Wilson not long ago on the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
I talked to him out at SHOT Show about the Ghost Gunner machine. The technology has just advanced to the point that I don't think you can put the genie back in the bottle. So I believe what Americans who are concerned about crime want to see is not a press conference at the White House. They want to see fewer shootings on their block, right? And, from that perspective, this is all noise coming from Washington, D.C. This isn't going to change anything on the ground. What's interesting is that, there are steps that cities are taking right now that don't involve passing new laws, that don't involve, millions of dollars in new funding, and really don't offer much space for a politician to get involved. Like Dallas, Texas, when they decided to start looking at, where shootings are taking place, they figured out it was something like they kind of laid this microgrid of just a grid pattern over the city, and they found that something like in 151 of the 100,000 microgrids, they were seeing, it was like an ungodly number of crimes, like 60 or 70% of the shootings were happening in, less than 1% of the city. So they flooded those zones with police and homicides dropped by 30%. I had a story at Bearing Arms about the state's attorney in Jacksonville, who is sort of looking at the same thing. Who are the most prolific violent offenders? Let's start there. Let's not offer them plea bargains. Let's take them to court. Let's put them away for as long as we possibly can, because every time they get back out on the street, they're committing another violent crime. And violent crime, homicides dropped in Jacksonville last year when they were rising across much of the United States. This isn't rocket science, but it's also, again, there's not much space for pure politics. And that's what I think ultimately, you're right. This is Biden's crime response, but it is a political response, because I think the White House views all of these things as political problems, which is why it's so tone deaf, because they don't understand that if you live in a bad neighborhood, this isn't a political problem. This is a personal problem. When you can't send your kid to school without worrying about them being shot, when your best friend from high school is murdered walking out of a convenience store after buying a bottle of tea, which is what happened to my son's friend in Richmond, Virginia last year, a homicide that has not been solved yet. And Mayor LeVar Stoney, his political response is, well, let's have a gun buyback. Let's spend $500,000 on a gun buyback. I can tell you the people in Richmond, Virginia are not satisfied with that. And I don't think that Americans who are concerned about crime are going to be satisfied with Steve Dettelbach becoming the ATF director, or even being nominated, or a new rule that says you can't buy a DIY gun kit. Instead, you got to buy those components separately. Like, that's such a, can I say BS? Can I say the whole thing on this podcast?
Sure.
Okay.
We had a curse word last week. So
okay, good.
But
it is a bullshit response to something. Again, look, 2 weeks ago, I lost a son. And it wasn't due to a crime of violence. It was not gun involved, but I now know what it feels like to lose a child. So I can imagine, I can put myself in the shoes of a parent in Chicago or in Philadelphia or New York or Orlando, wherever. And I can imagine what it's like to lose a child in that circumstance. And the idea that I would be satisfied with the president saying, okay, we're going after ghost guns, or universal background checks, or any of the other bullshit gun laws that are about serving politicians and not protecting the public, is absurd. I don't know that every crime victim feels that way, but I just don't believe that this is going to have any appreciable impact on Democrats' political fortunes between now and the midterms.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair point of view, especially, in the case of ghost guns. I mean, I could certainly see the argument that maybe while gun rights activists view it as a rights issue to be able to build your own guns, maybe the general public views it differently, and so in that sense they could do better on the issue. But at the same time, even if you accept the ATF's estimation that they've seen an increase in unserialized or ghost guns showing up at crime scenes, it still represents such a tiny percentage of the overall number of guns at crime scenes that even if you got rid of every single one of them, it wouldn't have any appreciable effect on crime. So it's hard to look at these things as an ATF director appointment. I mean, look, they already have one. I mean, they just demoted him, but they have directors. They've had directors. They've operated without permanent directors for a long time. They've only ever had one Senate confirmed director. It's not, the argument is that long-term vision for the agency would be affected by a permanent director, but the day-to-day is probably not going to be radically changed by a director coming in terms of crime fighting at the very least. You might have, going after gun dealers for, paperwork infractions, is something maybe you'd get more emphasis on, but will that have an impact on crime? Hard to say. And so it's a stretch, I think, I get it as a larger part, I guess, but they're really emphasizing this stuff. He did a Rose Garden speech on it. He didn't do that on, crime was the violence interruption programs, which they, to their credit, are funding. They don't really emphasize those things. And they, he has talked about increasing the number of police, but of course that's not really something the federal government can even do that much about, because it's the local police that actually investigate murders and violent crimes in most places. It's not the purview of the federal government. So I do think it's a stretch.
So there is a bit, I think, of a pushback to the defund the police rhetoric that's involved here, because you're right. This is, the ATF is a law enforcement agency. And so,
right.
You could say this is, we're not anti-cop, we're, pro ATF. And Biden has called for, $1.3 billion in new spending for the ATF. I do find it very interesting. He has more money in his proposed budget to the ATF to hire inspectors to go after gun stores than actual ATF field agents to go after, gun traffickers, which again, I think is an indication of where the focus is. And it's on people who are trying to do the right thing. Like, that's who this administration and that's who the gun control lobby wants to target right now. Their primary focus are the people who want to obey the law, who just want reasonable laws, right? And that's, I think, where the fight is right now. I would like to think that both gun owners and gun control activists agree that violent crime is bad and we should do more to stop violent criminals.
Right.
It's just that, the gun control activists seem to make it more of a priority to go after legal gun owners and they'll maybe there's some sort of trickle down effect to violent crime. I don't know. If I understood that line of thinking, maybe I would be a gun control activist, but it has always just been, it has never made any sense to me from a logical perspective. And so.
Sure. Yeah. There's obviously a difference in priorities there.
Yeah, there is. And that's why I just think that, you can have the dog and pony show and you can talk about all of the efforts that the federal government are doing to reduce violent crime. Crime to me is primarily a local phenomena. And while we certainly saw crime spikes in a lot of the country in 2020, I would argue it was because a lot of localities saw the same phenomena. We all went through COVID. That was one stressor that shut down the court systems. It created a huge backlog. So when people were arrested for violent crimes, they were put back out on the street. They were free to commit more violent crimes. The court dates kept getting pushed back. I mean, like that was a big stressor. Then you had the George Floyd riots, big stressor number two. Again, a lot of cities went through that experience. And the resulting, defund the police rhetoric, you had a lot of departments that all of a sudden saw officers leaving for greener pastures. And that has had a spillover effect so that a lot of major departments are still down dozens, if not hundreds, of officers to this day. Fewer officers on the street, I'd believe, helps create an atmosphere where people believe that they can get away with murder. And often they do. That's one of the other issues here is that clearance rates in a lot of cities have plummeted. Homicide clearance rate in Chicago below 50%. The non-fatal shooting clearance rate. If you just shoot somebody and they don't die in Chicago, you've got about a 90% chance of getting away with that crime. And if you got a 90% chance of getting away with something, you're probably going to see a lot more of it. So, I think that these are generally local phenomena. It's driven primarily by a relatively small number of people in any given community who are awfully prolific. So to me, the idea of a one-size-fits-all top-down approach to crime has never made a heck of a lot of sense. But again, we are seeing local departments make inroads, change their strategies, go back to focusing on these sort of nuts and bolts policing, targeted deterrence, things of that nature. But one of the things that is also really important when you're in terms of fighting crime is something you just mentioned when you talk about the relationship that the ATF has with these gun store owners. And that is, when you've got open lines of communication between any law enforcement agency and the community that they serve, that's going to be better for everybody. It leads to, more witnesses, which leads to more prosecutions and more convictions and more violent criminals taken off the street. If the Biden administration, the gun control lobby, is successful at weaponizing the ATF against the gun industry, and these gun store owners who before had no problem were eager to call, their pal at the ATF and say, hey, listen, we just had a weird experience. I turned somebody away. I want you to know about it. I wouldn't sell them a gun, didn't even put them through a background check. I don't know how many of those folks are going to go out of their way. I don't think many of them will, refuse to cooperate with the ATF, but I don't know how many of them are going to go out of their way to pick up the phone call and put themselves on the ATF's radar for any reason whatsoever. That's a real danger. And again, I think the Biden administration's moves here, Stephen, it's not just that they're an attack on our right to keep and bear arms, which I think that they are. But from a crime perspective, separating out the constitutional concerns, just from a crime perspective, I think this takes us further away from the policies and the strategies and the tactics that can actually make a difference. And I think it's likely to make things worse in a lot of cities. And I don't think that can be understated here. Again, I think, removing Marvin Richardson, installing somebody for maybe 4 or 5 months, maybe longer. I mean, if Dettelbach doesn't get confirmed, but the idea is to put him in there for 4 or 5 months at most. This just makes the agency. I would love to hear what some of your ATF sources think is going to happen over the next 4 or 5 months, because my prediction is going to be, this is just going to be an agency in turmoil and chaos and almost at a standstill.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to watch what effect all this has. I think you're right as far as the sort of lingering issues in terms of crime fighting in the United States, from, understaffing to community relationships. Obviously, that was a big theme of one of the major issues with the surrounding the George Floyd situation. That remains an issue. I mean, a lot of these things are like stuff that's been a problem for a long time and is continuing to be a problem, and there isn't an easy fix to most of it, especially not something as trivial as appointing a permanent ATF director or banning ghost gun kits or whatever. But those are longer term problems. I'm sure the president and his administration realize that too. But I'm interested too. Just real quick, last question here, because I know you got to go. Where do you see this Dettelbach nomination at today? I mean, it's early still. We haven't had the confirmation hearing yet, which is going to be a big deal. But what do you think the baseline is today in terms of how many votes we could expect him to get if the vote was tomorrow?
I mean, I think you got to start with a baseline of 48, and take Manchin and King off the table, at least theoretically, right? Neither one of them came out, after Biden announced Dettelbach's nomination and said, that's my guy. I'll gladly vote for him. That doesn't mean that they haven't given Biden or the White House private assurances that they will. I don't know. I mean, if I were Joe Biden, would I have put forth a name without talking to Angus King, Joe Manchin, John Tester? No, I would not. I would have made sure that any name I put forward, they had said, I don't have any, as far as I know, I don't have a problem with them, at the very least. Whether or not that happened, I don't know. Do you know?
I don't think it did. I can't say for sure either, but I don't know that they did anything quite like that.
Well, that's moronic. But again, that's probably par for the course for this administration. So again, I think you have to now start with a starting point of 48. And listen, I mean, the problem for Steve Dettelbach is that while he didn't work for a gun control group like David Chipman, he got the endorsement of those gun control groups when he ran for Attorney General of Ohio. So all of the positions that David Chipman held that ultimately disqualified him from serving as the permanent director of the ATF, Steve Dettelbach has also held. I mean, he's expressed support for gun bans. He's expressed support for, all of these new regulations. Maybe I don't know if he's gone so far as David Chipman is to say that the AR-15 should be considered a machine gun under the National Firearms Act. Maybe that's something that can come up during his confirmation hearing. But I don't. Well,
he's for an assault weapons ban, so kind of the same idea.
Exactly. Yeah. So I don't think that Dettelbach, if the vote comes down to his positions and his philosophy and what he brings to the table as ATF director, I don't see that there's any reason why he would be any more acceptable to Joe Manchin and Angus King than David Chipman was. I mean, at the end of the day.
As far as the core issue, if Chipman's nomination failed because of his policy positions, then I believe that that's true. But I think also it probably was more of a combination of the policy positions and his various comments that he'd made and his personality being, the fact that he's very a bombastic kind of guy and he had a bad confirmation hearing. And obviously they blame the White House for not doing enough to support him afterwards or speaking up enough on his behalf. There's a lot of things to consider with the way these things go. And senators are, of course, can be pretty fickle guys. I think it's interesting that you're starting from 48 and going the other way, like that he has to earn the votes. I would start from, 53 and go backwards. He has to lose those votes. That's how I would look at it, is like there's probably, there's a couple Republicans who are willing to give the president what he wants in most nominations, but then unless there's something in particular that they don't like about the person, and then you'll lose their votes. And then you get to the 50 Democrats, and you got to do a little more to lose their votes, of course, just because the president's a Democrat. So it's interesting, though. I think it'll be an interesting one to watch to see if he makes it through. And I think that, was it the Times that said they were targeting fall, which is weird because you'd think they would target spring,
right?
Like get it over before the election. I don't know if they're trying for a lame duck confirmation.
I mean, I've heard, really like a May confirmation hearing, but then, you're probably running into the summer recess for a full vote.
That's what happened
go back
with
on the campaign trail. Yeah.
So that's what, but I don't know, dragging it out to fall gives you the same issues. You still have it as an election issue, but we'll see. We'll have to wait and see. I'm sure we'll both be covering this as it goes forward. So people should head over to bearingarms.com to check out your writing and watch Cam and Company. It's on YouTube. Where else can people find that? It's primarily on YouTube, right?
If you want to see the beard, and YouTube. If you just want to listen, all the major podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, Spotify, and all the rest.
And I was just on recently, so go check out that episode. We got a hat beard. I did this specifically because you were coming on the hat beard combo. So people should watch this show on YouTube as well, and then head over to Cam and Company and check that out too. But we're going to head over to the news segment. Thanks so much, Cam, for being with us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Stephen.
All right, we're back with contributing writer Jake Fogelman to talk about another news story that's making waves this week out of Florida, actually, of all places. I guess a lot of news comes out of Florida these days, but not usually from a prominent Democrat and not usually about gun rights. So, Jake, tell us a little bit about what happened down there. You wrote about this, and I think people will be interested.
Yeah, definitely an unexpected event. As you pointed out, a prominent Democrat, Nikki Fried, who is the only statewide elected Democrat to hold office in Florida. She's been that way since 2018. She actually just filed a lawsuit against the Biden administration on Second Amendment grounds. You have a prominent Democrat who's challenging the Biden administration for gun rights.
Yeah, pretty shocking stuff, honestly.
Right.
At this point, but I mean, it is Florida, so she's running for governor there, right? She's the top candidate on the Democratic side, I believe.
Right. Yeah. Her and Charlie Crist, who's been a longtime figure in Florida politics, they're both vying to take DeSantis' spot.
And so what's she filing suit over?
Yeah. So she is actually tying it to the federal prohibition on marijuana users from owning or possessing guns. So under the Gun Control Act, it's still considered a controlled substance, which is disqualifying if you want to purchase a gun or even possess a gun. But Florida is a medical marijuana state. And so she's saying that medical marijuana patients who are legally state licensed to use medical marijuana and then would otherwise be legally able to own a gun are being deprived of their Second Amendment rights. So she's suggesting that should be struck down as unconstitutional. Yeah,
it's interesting to see her go there, but certainly that it has been an issue among some gun rights activists for a long time now. If you go into a gun store and buy a gun, you'll see on the form, it explicitly tells you you can't be somebody who uses weed and legally purchase a gun because it's a Schedule I narcotic under federal law, even if it's legal in your state. So that's where the conflict exists here. And it's interesting to see Freed champion that particular intersection of rights, I suppose, that intersection of state law and federal law. And it's certainly, I think there's a big political aspect to it, right? Because she's currently, one of the top candidates to run against Ron DeSantis, the Republican governor there. And Florida is a state that's been trending red over the last several years. So it's she's not running in Massachusetts, she's running in Florida. And it's interesting to see Democrats adapt, especially, you look at somebody like Beto O'Rourke, right? Who's running in Texas and has been just all over the place on guns, but primarily has stuck with his declaration that he wants to literally confiscate all of the AR-15s in Texas, which again is the most popular rifle. So Freed is taking a totally different track than him.
No, yeah, that's exactly right. Florida, commonly referred to as the gun-shy state. Obviously, gun rights are fairly popular there. And as you pointed out, it's been trending red. DeSantis is relatively popular, typically above 50% in approval polls, which is, for our modern standards, that's pretty popular. But it's also kind of remarkable to see someone like Freed, who I think just Wednesday when she announced the suit also was endorsed by Moms Demand Action as what they call them, gun sense candidates. Yeah. So it's just funny to see her get endorsed by the biggest gun control group in the country the same day that she files a gun rights lawsuit against a sitting Democratic president.
Well, I think that speaks to something you wrote about in an analysis piece for the members over at thereload.com, which is basically that it's not that Freed is becoming a gun rights activist across the board. It's more that she's found a particular tactic to exploit here, like combining a gun rights issue with a traditionally progressive issue of legalizing marijuana, right?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. It allows her to make inroads with potentially gun owners that maybe aren't fully red. There's a lot of gun owners that are independents, some that are Democrats. So it allows her to make an appeal, at least a little bit, to gun rights, while still, I think, maintaining a good progressive position, because as you pointed out, that's a traditionally progressive stance, is to stick up for the rights of people to use marijuana. So it's an interesting strategy that maybe other Democrats could potentially emulate in other red states or other more swing states to kind of thread that needle and still not fully alienate their fellow progressives.
Yeah. And I think it's also, there's good evidence that this is potentially in response to a lot of those new gun owners who tend to be more of a democratic demographic, right? Like they tend to be more urban, they're more minorities, more women, from what we've seen over the last 2 years in the surge of new gun ownership. But what we're seeing, as you pointed out in your piece, is polling indicates that they are moving away from gun control and are becoming more favorable to gun rights, perhaps in some cases even more favorable towards gun rights than previous owners, people who bought before the pandemic. So I think this is the first major sign that those shifts are having an effect in electoral politics.
I think that's right. Yeah, as you pointed out, I track it pretty extensively in my piece. All the polls we've been covering since at least last year, but poll after poll after poll seems to show that people are by and large moving away from gun control. And as you pointed out, that recent University of Chicago poll that tracked the new gun owners that came aboard during the pandemic, on many issues, they're more fervently in favor of liberalized gun laws than the traditional gun owners. So as you said, this could be a viable strategy for politicians moving forward. Clearly, there's a public opinion shift, and in a democracy, you kind of have to be responsive to shifts in public opinion, particularly in a state like Florida. So it'll be interesting to see how this changes other political dynamics.
It will be. I'll be interested to see if other Democrats take this sort of tactic and run with it, especially given the uphill battle they have to retain control of the House and Senate in these upcoming elections. But I do think, honestly, that DeSantis has probably left some room for her to move in here. He hasn't really done much on guns in recent years. He's made noises, I guess, about supporting constitutional carry, permitless carry in Florida, but he hasn't really pushed very hard for it. He's been more of the opinion that he would sign it if it made it to his desk, but it hasn't made it to his desk, and he hasn't seemed to really do much of anything to ensure that it makes it to his desk. So there's certainly room there, and Republicans very recently passed gun control measures in Florida after the Parkland shooting. So certainly there's the opportunity to appeal to people who are gun owners who vote on that issue but aren't solidly Republican. And it seems like that's what Nikki Fried is attempting to do here. How successful it'll be, we'll have to keep watching and reporting on, but it's certainly interesting to see.
Yeah, I think like as you said, it's just not something you expect. An endorsed gun control politician suing a president that literally just a week ago made big moves enacting gun control. He just passed the ghost gun final rule, announced a new ATF director, and then now is being sued by a fellow Democrat over a gun law. So it's an interesting thing.
Yep, absolutely. Well, if you want to keep up with this story, I suggest you head over to thereload.com. You can sign up for our free weekly newsletter. And if you want even more analysis like this, you want to read that piece that Jake wrote, you can buy a membership and help support our reporting. The Reload is a 100% independent publication that is 100% funded by our readers. And so if you want to support what we're doing, if you want access to exclusive pieces, exclusive stories, exclusive analysis pieces, you want this podcast a day early, you want to be on the podcast, we'd love to do I think we'll do another member segment here coming in the short term. But head on over. There's benefits to membership for sure. And but that's it for this week. We will see you guys again next week.